What is mind? Have you ever truly paused to ask what the mind actually is? Not how it works, not what it does, but what it is. We often blur three words together: brain, mind, and consciousness. But each points to a different layer of our being. The brain is structure, about 1.3 kilograms of tissue, neurons, chemicals, and electrical currents. You can scan it, dissect it, measure its activity. It is the physical machinery. The mind is not a place. It is a process. It is what the brain does. Thinking, remembering, imagining, deciding. It's the software running atop the brain's hardware. And then there is consciousness, something stranger still. Not what the system does, but what it feels like to be the system. The raw, unfiltered sense of being. The mind lives between the brain and consciousness. It is the space where experience is organized, where patterns emerge, where the external world is modeled into something usable. From an evolutionary standpoint, minds did not evolve to solve equations or write poetry. Minds evolved because they gave living things a survival advantage. A mind lets an organism simulate possibilities internally before taking action. It allows imagining, planning, hesitating, learning. It replaces blind reflex with informed choice. That changed everything. But the mind didn't stop at survival. Over time, it grew into a space for memory, language, reflection, creativity. It became not just where we hold the world, but where we hold ourselves. Still, we never experience the world directly. We experience a mind-made model of it, filtered by attention, shaped by emotion, colored by memory. Each mind builds its own version of reality and inhabits it. And minds are not static. They change with every experience, every new idea, every new wound. The mind you had a year ago is not the mind you have now. So what is the mind? It is not your thoughts. It is not your memories. It is not even your identity. It is the living system that holds all these things together, just long enough for you to say, me. You can't see it, but everything you see through it. Understanding the mind is not just the first step of this journey. It is the lens through which everything else will be seen. Where does the mind come from? That is the next mystery. Does it emerge from the brain's complexity like fire from wood? Or is it something deeper, a fundamental aspect of the universe itself, only wearing the mask of neurons and synapses for a while? We are about to find out. Where does mind come from? It's one thing to ask what the mind is. It's another to ask how it came to exist at all. The earliest forms of life had no thoughts, no memories, only chemical reactions and simple reflexes. A jellyfish pulses through the water without a brain. A worm withdraws from light without needing to know what light is. Life, at first, simply reacted. But eventually, reaction wasn't enough. Survival began to favor something more: anticipation, moving toward food before sensing it, avoiding danger before feeling pain. This shift from reaction to prediction marked the beginning of mind. Nervous systems evolved to process more complex information. Neurons clustered into networks. Simple light-detecting cells became eyes that formed images. Reflex became response. Response became strategy. Minds didn't cause brains. Minds arose when brains grew complex enough to model the world internally and choose action over reflex. With time, organisms gained more than sensation. They built internal maps of threats, opportunities, outcomes. The world became something to think through, not just to collide with. Thought replaced trial and error. Awareness emerged, not all at once, but in stages, from raw perception to memory, from simple learning to imagination, from experience to self-awareness. The mind wasn't built in a moment. It accumulated, layer by layer, from sensation to perception, from instinct to planning, from reaction to reflection. Each leap forward was selected by nature. Every advantage sharpened survival. Every new function, prediction, memory, simulation, moved the inner world closer to what we now recognize as mind. So where does the mind come from? It didn't begin with a spark. It began with complexity and with the need to move beyond mere survival. What was the need for a mind? Imagine a world without minds. Organisms react. They move toward light, away from heat. They eat. They reproduce. But every move is immediate. Every danger must be faced directly. Every mistake is paid for in full. Without a mind, there is no second-guessing, no rehearsal, no imagining a better move before committing to action. As the environment grew more complex, more predators, more competition, less predictable sources of food, this simple strategy became increasingly dangerous. Reflex alone couldn't keep up with uncertainty. Minds became necessary. A mind solves a fundamental problem. How do you act in a world where not every danger can be seen and not every opportunity can be sensed? Without a mind, organisms must trial and error their way through survival, suffering the consequences of every misstep. With a mind, they can predict, simulate, and avoid fatal mistakes before ever making them. A mind allows for mental modeling, imagining outcomes before they happen, evaluating choices without physically testing each one, storing knowledge, and applying it to new, unseen situations. This is not a bonus feature. It is a survival mechanism. In complex environments, flexibility beats reflex. Adaptation within a single lifetime becomes more crucial than rigid behaviors inherited across generations. The mind gives an organism an internal testing ground, a way to run experiments on possible futures without risking real-world consequences. It makes long-term strategy possible, delaying gratification, tracking investments, maintaining social bonds, and recognizing deception. All of these require holding multiple possibilities in mind, not just reacting to the present. In social animals, the pressure intensifies. Now the mind must not only model the environment, but model other minds, predicting intentions, beliefs, and future actions of others. In groups, a mind is not a luxury. It's an arms race. Without a mind, existence is immediate and narrow. With a mind, existence stretches forward and backward through time, outward into networks of others, inward into self-reflection. So, what was the need for a mind? The need was for survival beyond reflex, for planning in the face of uncertainty, for simulating dangers instead of falling victim to them, for organizing action in a world that changes faster than instinct can adapt. The mind isn't an accident of evolution. It is the first virtual reality system ever built, and the only one where the cost of failure was life itself. What does the mind do? The mind isn't just for thinking. Thinking is only a small fraction of what it actually does. At its core, the mind is a model-building system. It transforms raw sensory input, light, sound, heat, texture, into meaningful experience. You don't see photons, you see objects. You don't hear vibrations, you hear voices, music, context. The mind turns sensation into story. But that's just the surface. The mind doesn't only process the present. It moves through time. It recalls past events, some clearly, others through layers of distortion. It also projects possible futures, running internal simulations long before any action begins. Psychologists call this mental time travel. It allows us to predict, imagine, and plan. Beyond memory and projection, the mind abstracts. It takes specific experiences, someone lying to you, and generalizes them into broader patterns. People can be untrustworthy. From patterns, we build beliefs. From beliefs, expectations. The mind constructs frameworks to interpret the world, not merely record it. It also maintains the sense of self. Despite constant change, the mind preserves a thread of identity, your name, your goals, your preferences, your memories. Even when everything around you shifts, this inner continuity holds you together. Socially, the mind acts as an interpreter. It reads tone, posture, and subtle cues to model what others are thinking, a capacity known as theory of mind. Without it, trust, empathy, and society itself would fall apart. Then there's creativity. The mind doesn't just reflect the world, it reconfigures it. It stitches fragments of experience into things that have never existed before. Art, metaphors, inventions, stories. When belief and reality clash, the mind protects itself. It engages in cognitive dissonance, bending perception to maintain internal coherence, even if it means distorting the truth. It's not trying to deceive, it's trying to preserve stability. So what does the mind do? It senses, it remembers, it predicts, it decides, it imagines, it connects, it models the world and your place within it. The mind doesn't just process life, it builds the experience of living it, not merely to survive, but to transform raw information into meaning. How does the mind create thoughts? It all begins in silence. deep within a 1.3 kilogram organ, wrapped in folds of living tissue. Inside the brain, roughly 86 billion neurons sit at the center of it all. Each neuron connects to thousands of others, weaving trillions of possible pathways. Alone, a neuron is silent. But together, they fire in patterns that give rise to everything: speech, memory, fear, hope. A thought starts as a ripple, a pattern of electrical activity. One neuron fires, then another, and a cascade spreads across the brain. Signals race through neural pathways at speeds up to 250 miles per hour. But thought is not merely about speed, it's about structure. The brain is organized into specialized circuits, some for vision, some for language, some for emotion or attention. Between neurons lie tiny gaps called synapses. When a neuron fires, it releases neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that leap across the synapse and influence the next neuron. Some signals excite, others inhibit. The precise timing, rhythm, and intensity of these chemical exchanges create the dynamic language of thought. Thoughts are not isolated events. They emerge from integration, a conversation across the brain. The prefrontal cortex analyzes. The hippocampus recalls. The limbic system paints emotions across the canvas. When these systems synchronize, thought arises, much like musicians in an orchestra playing a single, intricate score. Even more extraordinary, the brain is self-organizing. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every thought, every experience, leaves a physical imprint. Learning, memory, and even imagination reshape the brain's wiring, constantly evolving its architecture. Your thoughts also have rhythm. Brainwaves, oscillations in neural activity, shift in speed depending on your state of mind, slower during sleep, faster during intense focus. These rhythms synchronize activity across different regions, keeping the mental symphony in time. Yet, for all we understand about these mechanics, one mystery persists. How do electrical signals become subjective experience? We can trace the pathways. A signal fires in the motor cortex, and your hand moves. Another loop activates, and a memory flickers to life. But how do these biological events translate into the feeling of thought, into meaning? This is where neuroscience touches the edges of philosophy. The leap from physical event to conscious experience remains unexplained. Perhaps thought emerges when a biological system becomes complex enough to simulate not just the world, but itself. And perhaps the next great frontier is not just in mapping the brain's structure, but in learning how to listen to its deep, living patterns and recognizing ourselves inside them. When did the study of the mind begin? It didn't start in a lab. It began around fires, under stars, in silence. Long before the word mind even existed, humans noticed something strange happening behind their eyes, something that could remember, imagine, desire, and reflect. Something that wasn't the body, but seemed to live inside it. In ancient India, around 1500 BCE, early Vedic texts spoke of manas, a subtle internal faculty responsible for thought and emotion. Later, the Upanishads introduced the concept of Atman, the inner self, not as an isolated identity, but as something deeply connected to the entire cosmos. The mind was seen as both individual and universal. In ancient Egypt, the soul was divided into the Ka and the Ba. One stayed with the body, the other wandered freely, especially in dreams. Egyptians preserved the brain during mummification, though beliefs about thought varied. Some said it came from the heart, others from the breath, others still from a vital spirit that animated the flesh. Then came Greece. Around 500 BCE, philosophers like Heraclitus and Parmenides began to ask, what is thought? What is being? Plato offered one of the first structural theories of the mind, a tripartite soul divided into reason, emotion, and desire. Aristotle, more empirically minded, described mental life through its functions: perception, memory, imagination, and reasoning. In China, Taoist thinkers saw mind not as a fixed entity, but as a flow, a dynamic process aligned with the rhythms of nature. Early Buddhist thought, too, rejected the idea of a fixed mind or self. What we call a self, they argued, was an illusion, a moving, shifting collection of processes mistaken for something solid. The study of mind didn't remain purely philosophical. During the Islamic Golden Age, Thinkers like Avicenna and Al-Farabi explored how thought might arise from the body and how intellect could transcend it, hinting at layers of mind that bridged the earthly and the divine. In medieval Europe, the mind was approached through theology, through questions of free will, moral reasoning, and divine intention. A real shift came in the 1600s with René Descartes. Sitting alone with his doubts, he asked, "What can I know for certain?" His answer, "I think, therefore I am." With that, the mind became not just a subject of wonder, but the foundation of certainty, the starting point for a new kind of inquiry. From there, the study of the mind branched into science. First early psychology, then cognitive science, neuroscience, artificial intelligence. Today it spans everything from brain imaging to behavioral economics, from meditation studies to machine learning. But it didn't begin with labs or journals. It began with a pause, a breath, a question. What is this that thinks? What is this that dreams? What is this that wonders what it is? And it is a question we are still learning how to ask. What is the biology of mind? What is the mind beyond biology? And are they somehow the same? What is the biology of mind? When we ask what the mind is, we often leap straight to thoughts, feelings, or awareness. But underneath all of that lies something more basic. Biology, a structure, a system, a living architecture not designed to think abstractly, but to keep an organism alive. The mind begins with the body. Even before there were brains, life evolved to respond. Single-celled organisms react to light, heat, pressure. They don't have minds, but they sense, and sensing is the first primitive step toward awareness. Fast forward hundreds of millions of years, nervous systems emerge. Networks of cells designed to coordinate movement, track changes, adapt to threats. At first, they're simple, nerve nets in jellyfish, small ganglia in worms. But over time, these systems layer, branch, and fold. Eventually, biology gives us the brain, not a singular control center, but a decentralized, modular network. Different regions specialize: vision, movement, memory, emotion, communicating through electric signals and chemical messengers. And yet the brain doesn't float in isolation. It's embedded. Every signal is tied to a heartbeat. Every thought echoes with hormonal rhythms. What we call mind is shaped by hunger, fatigue, temperature, posture. The brain interprets the world through the body, and the body through the brain. This is called embodied cognition. The mind isn't just housed in the body. It is the body processing itself. Even more striking is the role of feedback. The biology of the mind is not linear. It's circular. It loops. Signals travel from the body to the brain and back again. You don't just feel fear and then run. Sometimes you run first, and your brain decides you're afraid. Biology is not cause, then effect. It's cause, effect, response, update, repeat. And this system didn't arise overnight. Evolution built it piece by piece. Older brain structures like the brainstem and limbic system manage survival, breathing, reflexes, emotion. Newer parts, like the neocortex, handle abstract thought, language, imagination. But even the newest parts are stacked on ancient foundations. That's why the mind sometimes contradicts itself. One part wants logic, another wants safety, another craves approval. Biology layered these motives across time, and now they all live together inside the same skull. So when we speak of the biology of mind, we're not talking about a single organ. We're talking about a living system. Cells, tissues, networks, hormones, feedback loops, all wired together to turn sensing into meaning, meaning into memory, memory into action. This system doesn't think because it was designed to think. It thinks because, over time, thinking helped it survive. The mind is not a ghost in the machine. It is the machine, learning to imagine itself. And underneath every moment of awareness, the biology is still running, quietly, continuously, doing its ancient job. What is the chemistry of the mind? Every thought you've ever had was steeped in chemistry. Unlike the rapid electrical pulses that race along neurons, chemistry works slower, deeper, it lingers. It shapes how long a feeling lasts, how strong a desire becomes, how easily a memory settles in. At the heart of this chemistry are neurotransmitters, tiny molecules that carry messages from one neuron to the next. When a neuron fires, it sends an electrical signal to the end of its axon, where it releases these chemicals into the synapse, the microscopic gap between neurons. The neurotransmitters drift across, binding to receptors on the next neuron, triggering it to fire or silencing it. But not all neurotransmitters act the same way. Dopamine fuels motivation and reward. It spikes not just when you reach a goal, but when you anticipate one. That's why dopamine governs ambition as well as addiction. Serotonin helps regulate mood, sleep, appetite, and social behavior. A drop in serotonin can color the entire world gray, slowing thoughts and emotions alike. Norepinephrine surges during stress, sharpening focus, quickening the pulse, helping you react to danger, but also making calmness feel impossible. GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, reigns in overexcitement. Without enough GABA, thoughts race, rest vanishes, and the mind feels like it's unraveling. Endorphins mask pain and flood the system with pleasure, explaining why deep laughter, a long run, or moments of deep connection can feel like pure relief. Beyond neurotransmitters, the brain is bathed in hormones, long-range chemical messengers like cortisol, oxytocin, adrenaline. These don't just leap across neurons. They flow through the bloodstream, shifting the emotional weather of the entire body. Oxytocin deepens trust and bonding. Cortisol arms the body for stress, but too much for too long wears it down. Testosterone and estrogen shape not just the body but emotion, decision-making, even risk tolerance. This chemical web is never still. Your brain is not chemically neutral. It leans toward caution or confidence, toward openness or withdrawal, depending on an endless molecular conversation happening beneath awareness. And while we like to believe that thoughts spark emotions, often it is chemistry that sets the stage. You don't feel hopeful and then get a dopamine rush. You get a dopamine rush, and then hope blooms. Even the placebo effect, long dismissed as all in the mind, is fueled by real, measurable chemical shifts. Belief itself triggers biology. So, what is the chemistry of the mind? It is not just mood swings or fleeting mental states. It is the hidden script behind every behavior, every thought, every flicker of attention, a molecular dialogue humming beneath the visible mind. The mind is not made of chemicals, but it listens to them. Sometimes, the smallest molecule can steer the biggest story. What is the physics of mind? The brain is made of matter, cells, molecules, atoms. But the mind, the movement, the thought, the feeling, feels like something else. Still, if it exists in the universe, it must follow the universe's rules. And those rules begin with physics. At its simplest, physics studies how things change, how systems store energy, move, evolve, and decay. So what happens when we apply that lens, not to stars or particles, but to thought itself? One starting point is energy. Your brain, though small, consumes about 20% of your body's energy. Every thought is an exchange, a cascade of ions, a shift in electrical charge, a chemical event triggered and reset. But the energy itself isn't thinking. It's the organization of the energy that matters. And that brings us to information. In 1990, physicist John Wheeler offered a phrase that still echoes through both science and philosophy. It from bit. He proposed that everything in the universe, even particles, even space, might emerge not from substance, but from information, from simple distinctions, yes versus no, bit by bit. So what if the mind isn't just running on information? What if it is information? Neuroscience already leans in this direction. Thoughts aren't just electrical pulses. They're structured patterns, signals that can be encoded, compressed, translated. In this view, the brain becomes an information processing system, and the mind becomes the story that information tells itself. Physics offers another concept, entropy, the measure of disorder. Every system tends toward chaos unless energy is used to maintain order. The mind pushes against that tide. It organizes, predicts, simulates. It makes meaning out of noise. When you learn something, your brain reduces uncertainty. It increases structure. It reshapes entropy into order. And every time it does, there's a physical cost. Tiny, measurable amounts of energy are transformed into insight. Some physicists even wonder if consciousness itself is tied to integration, the binding of information across systems. The more richly information is linked, the more irreducible it becomes, the more vivid the experience. This idea echoes the neuroscientific concept of the phi value, a measure of how much information is being unified within the brain. And then there's the quantum question. Some speculate that consciousness might not be purely classical, that at the tiniest scales, in the flicker of ions or the coherence of molecules, quantum effects might subtly shape awareness. It's still unproven, but the question remains, if physics governs everything, does it also govern the flicker of thought? So what is the physics of mind? It's the search for a bridge between energy and meaning, between patterns and perception. It's the idea that thought is not some magical exception to the universe, but another ripple within it, structured, costly, and perhaps governed by laws we have yet to fully discover. The mind may not be made of light or matter, but it moves like them. It obeys something deeper than biology, a rhythm written into the code of the cosmos. Where does consciousness come from? Every thought you've ever had, every memory, every dream, all of it is a consequence of the universe learning to know itself through the physics of mind. Where does consciousness come from? Sound, color, memory, feeling, all of it happens inside your head. But why does it feel like anything at all? Your brain is a physical system, cells firing, chemicals flowing, circuits activating. Yet somehow, those signals don't just process information. They create an inner world, a subjective point of view, a place where the universe is felt. This is consciousness, and no one fully understands how it works. We can explain the mechanics. The brain receives input from the senses, processes it through vast networks of neurons, and produces outputs, movement, speech, memory. But that's the easy part. The hard part is this. Why should any of it come with an experience? Why doesn't the brain simply process information silently, without awareness? This is what philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. Not how the brain functions, but why its functions are accompanied by feeling. Why seeing the color red isn't just data processing, but something you experience. One major theory is integrated information theory, IIT. It suggests that consciousness arises from the degree to which information is interconnected. The more unified and irreducible the system, the richer the conscious experience. Think of it like a symphony. If each instrument played alone, there would be no music. But when they synchronize, something greater emerges, a whole that is more than the sum of its parts. Another approach is global workspace theory, GWT. It proposes that consciousness happens when information is made globally available across the brain, broadcast like a spotlight to multiple subsystems. What you become aware of is simply what wins the internal competition for attention. Others go deeper. Some argue that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe itself, like space, time, or mass. According to panpsychism, even particles might carry a faint, primitive form of awareness. Not thoughts or emotions, just a glimmer of experience. And from those subtle sparks, complex minds may emerge through intricate arrangements of matter. Then there are those who suggest consciousness is an illusion, that it doesn't exist in the way we think. It only feels real because the brain spins a convincing internal narrative. But illusion or not, it's the most undeniable part of our existence. You can doubt what you know, question what you remember, but you cannot doubt that you are experiencing something right now. So what gives rise to consciousness? Maybe it's integration. Maybe it's information. Maybe it's a hidden law of nature we have yet to discover. Whatever it is, it gives life its depth. It turns matter into meaning. It turns the universe from something that merely exists into something that can be felt. How many levels of consciousness are there? We often talk about it as a single thing, but consciousness likely exists on a spectrum. From the dim awareness of a sleeping mind, to the vivid self-reflection of a human being, to possibly even higher forms of consciousness we can't yet imagine. Maybe plants, animals, and even simpler forms of life possess their own glimmers of experience, different in quality, but no less real. Maybe there are states of consciousness, dream states, meditative states, altered states, that reveal dimensions of awareness beyond our everyday waking mind. Consciousness may not be a light you either have or don't. It may be a great ocean, with many depths still unexplored. How many levels of consciousness are there? We often think of consciousness like a switch, on or off, awake or asleep. But awareness doesn't work in binary. It moves in gradients, pulses in rhythms, and stretches across layers. Consciousness isn't a light. It's a dimmer. Neuroscience suggests that consciousness has both levels, ranging from deep, dreamless sleep to full alertness, and types, distinct expressions of experience that serve different purposes. Let's start with the levels. At the base is unconsciousness, not just ordinary sleep, but deep anesthesia or coma states where brain activity becomes scattered, disconnected, or almost silent. The body may still function, but there's no coherent experience holding it all together. Above that is minimal consciousness, brief flickers of awareness, like moments in light sleep or during certain brain injuries. Perception is fragmentary. Thoughts drift. Memory often doesn't even form. Then comes ordinary waking consciousness, our default mode. Sights, sounds, thoughts, and memories all stitched into a continuous stream. It feels seamless, but even this state is a balancing act between attention and distraction, between control and autopilot. Higher still is the flow state, complete immersion. Time distorts. Self-awareness fades. Athletes, artists, and programmers describe it as a zone of peak performance where action and awareness merge. It's not hyper-awareness. It's focused awareness, honed like a blade. Beyond that are altered states of consciousness, induced through meditation, psychedelics, trance, or sensory deprivation. These states radically shift perception, identity, and time. Some feel expansive, others disorienting, but all reveal that consciousness isn't fixed, it's elastic. At the highest level is metaconsciousness, the awareness of awareness itself. When you reflect on your thoughts, question your attention, or catch yourself drifting, you step outside the stream and watch the water move. You become both the experiencer and the observer. But levels are only half the story. There are also types of consciousness, each serving different roles. Sensory consciousness ties us to the external world, sight, sound, touch, the raw windows into reality. Emotional consciousness colors our experiences with feeling, urgency, and meaning, giving thought and memory their weight. Self-consciousness allows the mind to recognize itself as a subject. Not just pain exists, but I am in pain. Social consciousness models the minds of others, what they know, want, and feel. Without it, there's no empathy, no community, no culture. Temporal consciousness gives us time, the ability to remember the past, imagine the future, and experience the present as a moving line rather than a static point. Are there universal laws of minds? First clue, minds don't just react, they predict. Your brain is constantly guessing what's about to happen, what word will come next, where the ball will land, how someone might respond. It doesn't wait for reality to unfold, it prepares for it. This is the foundation of what scientists call predictive processing. At the core of predictive processing lies an idea borrowed from probability theory, Bayes' theorem, a rule for updating beliefs in light of new evidence. Your mind does this effortlessly. It holds expectations, priors, and updates them as the world delivers new information. If your brain expects silence but hears a sudden bang, it rapidly revises its internal model. This loop, prediction, feedback, correction, is happening constantly, even as you read this. And from this cycle emerges something powerful, efficiency. The brain doesn't waste energy processing every detail from scratch. It fills in gaps, glosses over redundancies, smooths over noise. That's why you don't notice the blind spot in your vision or why you sometimes mishear a sentence, only realizing it moments later. The mind is always working ahead, stitching coherence on the fly. Another near-universal law is the tendency to seek patterns, even when none exist. From constellations in the stars to faces in clouds, the brain imposes order onto chaos. Pattern recognition underlies everything from reading to relationships, helping us predict outcomes, anticipate danger, and find meaning. But it's not flawless. The mind's shortcuts, what psychologists call heuristics, are fast, often helpful, but also predictably distorted. Confirmation bias, availability bias, anchoring. These aren't random mistakes. They're systematic tendencies, woven into how minds simplify complexity to survive. Even emotions follow their own laws. Across cultures, certain expressions, fear, joy, disgust, manifest in strikingly similar ways. Emotions aren't just feelings, they are data. They regulate attention, influence decisions, encode memories. Emotions function as a kind of internal compass, helping the mind prioritize what matters most. Then there's memory. It doesn't work like a hard drive, passively recording events. It compresses, edits, and reconstructs. You remember not what happened exactly, but what was meaningful, and meaning is governed by attention, emotion, and relevance. These forces shape memory in consistent ways across individuals and even across species. So, are there universal laws of minds? Not laws in the strict, mathematical sense like in physics, but principles, loops, biases, and rhythms that emerge again and again. Prediction, compression, pattern seeking, error correction, emotional regulation, meaning reconstruction. These aren't quirks of isolated minds. They are signatures of how minds, in general, make sense of the world. The more we understand these principles, the more we see that thought isn't a mystery. It's a process, a system, a rhythm, one that moves in us, through us, and perhaps even beyond us. Which leads to a deeper question. What are the limits of mind? We often speak about the power of the mind, its creativity, resilience, imagination. But if the mind follows laws, if it operates through loops of prediction, correction, compression, and meaning-making, then perhaps its limits are not infinite. Perhaps they are shaped by the very mechanisms that allow it to exist. Just as every tool has edges it cannot cross, every mind might have horizons it cannot see past. Yet, paradoxically, the mind's very nature, to predict, to dream, to imagine, allows it to reach toward those edges, to stretch beyond its built-in frames. In doing so, the mind does not escape its laws. It uses them. Like a river, constrained by its banks, still finds endless paths forward. Maybe the true universality of the mind lies not just in its patterns, but in its yearning to transcend them. What are the limits of the mind? It imagines, predicts, solves, creates. But just as important is what it cannot do. Where it falters, where it reaches the edge of understanding and quietly stops. There are perceptual limits. You don't see all colors. You don't hear all frequencies. Your brain fills in blind spots without telling you. Even your memories are reconstructions, not recordings. The world you experience is a version, not the full source code. There are cognitive limits. Your attention can hold only a few things at once. You can't focus on everything. You rely on shortcuts, heuristics, to navigate the day. Efficient, but imperfect. They come with biases, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, anchoring. You see what fits, you overlook what doesn't. And then there are deeper, structural limits. Boundaries that may never be crossed. In the 18th century, philosopher Immanuel Kant proposed something profound. The mind doesn't just perceive the world, it shapes it. He divided reality into 3 layers. The phenomenal world, the world as we experience it. The noumenal world, the world as it exists beyond perception. And the transcendental structures, the built-in mental filters that shape all experience. Kant argued that space and time are not properties of the external world, but of the mind itself. We don't merely look through a lens. We live inside it. And every lens has edges. Modern science echoes this. Some physicists suggest that our minds evolved not to see truth, but to see what helps us survive. That what we call reality is more like a user interface, a set of icons on a desktop, useful, but not the full machinery underneath. Then there's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. In any complex logical system, there will be truths that are real but cannot be proven within the system itself. What if the mind is such a system? What if some truths are not just unknown to us, but unknowable? This isn't defeatism. It's perspective. To know that the mind has limits is to understand what makes it precious. Mystery exists, not as a failure of reason, but as a horizon. So what are the limits of the mind? Some are biological, some are cognitive, some are woven into the very structure of perception itself. But beyond every limit is a question. And beyond every question is the potential for humility, curiosity, awe. The mind cannot grasp everything, but it can grasp that it cannot grasp everything. And that might be its deepest strength. What is the self, and is it an illusion? When you say I, who exactly are you? What is the self, and is it an illusion? Talking about the self feels obvious. You're a person, a mind, a self. You remember your past. You think, you feel, you make choices. There's a sense of continuity, like you're the same person you were 5 years ago, just with more experiences stacked on top. But when we look closer, that feeling begins to blur. There's no single place in the brain where the self is stored, no central you sitting behind your eyes, pulling the levers. Instead, identity seems to emerge from many systems working together: memory, emotion, perception, attention, constantly syncing and reshaping. Some neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activate when you're not focused on the outside world. It's what constructs the inner monologue, the autobiographical sense of me. But that activity isn't constant. It shifts, it flickers, and when it quiets, through meditation, psychedelics, trauma, or deep flow, the self can feel like it vanishes entirely. That's where things get strange. You can be fully conscious, fully aware, and yet feel no boundary between yourself and the world. People describe it as ego loss, self-dissolution, or simply presence. Not emptiness, but the absence of the usual narrator. So if the self can disappear, what was it to begin with? Some philosophers argue the self is a narrative, a story the mind tells itself to organize experience. You aren't a single, unchanging identity, but a collection of roles, habits, memories, preferences, all stitched together by memory and language. And because the story feels coherent, it feels real. But coherence is not permanence. The you remember from childhood thought differently, spoke differently, wanted different things. Your body changed. Your thoughts evolved. Your values shifted. So did your relationships, your fears, your hopes. What exactly stayed the same? Maybe nothing. In Buddhism, this idea is central. There is no fixed self, only process. The mind clings to identity because it craves stability. But in truth, the self is like a flame, a shape that appears continuous, even though the material fueling it is always changing. Does that mean the self is fake? Not quite. It means it's functional. The self helps you make decisions, tell stories, build memories, form relationships. It's a mental interface, a useful simplification that lets you operate in a world too vast and complex to fully comprehend all at once. So what is the self? A pattern, a habit, a story, an ongoing negotiation between biology, experience, memory, and attention. And is it an illusion? Only if you think it's something solid, something permanent, something separate from everything else. Because the deeper you look, the more the self dissolves into the system that made it. And that leads to an even deeper mystery. If the self is a story told inside a mind, can one mind ever truly understand another? You've lived inside your own consciousness your whole life. Every thought you've ever had came filtered through your own inner world. You see faces, hear voices, touch skin, but the inner landscape of another being remains, in some fundamental way, unreachable. Maybe that's the real illusion. Not just the self, but the belief that two selves can ever fully know each other. And yet, somehow, across the gap, we still try. Can one mind truly understand another? You live inside your mind every second of your life. You know its rhythms, its thoughts, its contradictions, the memories that rise at the wrong times. You feel the full weight of your experiences, not just as facts, but as felt realities. And yet, no one else will ever truly inhabit that space, just as you will never fully inhabit theirs. We share words, gestures, glances, even moments of silence that feel charged with meaning. We say, "I know how you feel," and sometimes we really mean it. But what we're doing is guessing, trying to map one mind onto another using only the fragments we can observe from the outside. This is at the heart of what philosophers call the problem of other minds. You can see someone smile, cry, tremble, but you can't directly access the feeling behind it. You infer, you empathize, but at some level, the experience remains theirs alone. Even language, our greatest bridge between minds, is built on translation. I say grief, and you think of your own version. But is it the same as mine, or just something close enough to pass for understanding? And yet, we do connect. Mirror neurons in your brain fire when you see someone act, when you witness someone's pain. It's not just a metaphor. You physically simulate what you observe. That's empathy, not as sentiment, but as architecture, a bodily attempt to bridge the unbridgeable. Still, simulation isn't sameness. We don't merge. We reflect. We approximate. That's why misunderstandings happen even between people who love each other. Why you can feel lonely in a crowd. Why you can speak your truth as clearly as you know how and still feel unseen. But maybe full understanding was never the point. Maybe the goal isn't perfect translation. Maybe it's the honest effort, the willingness to sit with someone else's experience without rushing to fix it or fully grasp it. Maybe understanding doesn't mean entering another mind. It means respecting its depth. Art tries to do this. Music, poetry, storytelling. They don't transfer experiences directly. They create echoes. They activate something familiar in someone else. Not a shared mind, but a shared resonance. So, can one mind truly understand another? Maybe not in totality, but it can try. It can listen. It can reflect. It can reach out across the gap, even knowing it may never fully cross it. And maybe that's enough. Because in that reaching, in that small act of trying, the space between two minds becomes something else entirely. Not a wall, but a bridge. Not perfect understanding, but something just as powerful. Connection. Is there such a thing as objective truth? Opinion, emotion, culture, bias. All these color our view of reality. Yet beneath them, is there a reality that simply is? Cold, clear, unchanging. A truth that doesn't care what we believe. If such a truth exists, how would we ever know we had found it? Your mind doesn't see the world directly. It receives fragments. Light striking the retina, vibrations entering the ear, chemicals interacting with taste buds. These raw signals are interpreted, stitched together, and shaped into experience. What you perceive isn't the world itself. It's your brain's model of the world. And that model is built from countless influences: memory, expectation, mood, culture, language, belief. Two people can witness the same event and walk away with different truths. One sees kindness, another sees manipulation. One sees danger, another sees adventure. Which one is right? Which is the truth? In philosophy, this tension lives between realism and constructivism. Realism holds that truth exists independently of minds. It is out there, whether or not we perceive it correctly. Constructivism argues that all truth is filtered, constructed through perception, language, and thought. Maybe the world simply is, but we can only access it as it appears to us. Even science, our most rigorous tool for seeking truth, doesn't prove, it models, approximates. Gravity was once thought of as a force. Now it's understood as the curvature of space-time. Tomorrow, it might be reframed again. What we call truth is often just what hasn't been disproven yet. Culture shapes perception too. In some languages, time flows from left to right. In others, from east to west. Some cultures prize individualism, others, collectivism. These are not just preferences. They shape what we see, what we notice, and even what we think is real. Does this mean there is no objective truth? Not exactly. It means that if objective truth exists, we experience it like sunlight through stained glass. The light itself is real, but the colors are shaped by the frame. Perhaps objective truth isn't something we see purely. It's something we approach together, not a fixed island we stand upon, but a North Star we navigate by. We catch glimpses of it when perspectives overlap, when mathematics, observation, experience, and intuition converge on patterns that feel stable, less personal, more shared. Maybe that's enough. So, is there such a thing as objective truth? Maybe, but we never hold it in pure form. What we hold are versions, models, stories, some clearer, some more distorted. Truth isn't weakened by this. It becomes something dynamic, something we strive toward, not something we possess. Not a trophy for a shelf, but a horizon the mind is forever walking toward. What is the philosophy of mind? You can think, you can feel, you can imagine a distant future and recall a childhood memory in the same breath. You can reflect on your own thoughts. But have you ever stopped to ask, what exactly is all of this? That question, simple, impossible, essential, is the root of an entire branch of philosophy, the philosophy of mind. It's not about theories of behavior or diagnostic tools. It's not neuroscience or psychology, though it overlaps with both. It's the discipline that asks the hardest version of the simplest questions. What is a mind? What is consciousness? What does it mean to be something from the inside? At its core is the mind-body problem. How can something physical, the brain, give rise to something non-physical, experience? Why does neural activity come with the texture of joy, pain, memory, awareness? Why doesn't the brain just compute silently, like a machine? This is where the major positions begin to unfold. Dualism, most famously proposed by Descartes, says the mind and body are two fundamentally different substances, the physical world and the world of experience. But if they're separate, how do they interact? Materialism says there's only one thing, matter. The mind is just what the brain does. But this leads to another question. If the brain is just firing neurons, why does it feel like anything to be you? Some philosophers argue that consciousness is emergent, a property that arises only when the brain becomes complex enough. Others lean toward functionalism, the idea that what matters isn't the material, but the pattern. If a system processes information in the right way, it has a mind, whether it's made of neurons, silicon, or something else entirely. Then there's panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is fundamental, not something that emerges from matter, but something that exists alongside it, everywhere. In this view, even atoms may carry a glimmer of awareness, and minds are just more organized expressions of it. Philosophy of mind also asks about qualia, the raw feel of experience, the redness of red, the taste of mint, the ache of missing someone. These aren't things we can measure. They're private, subjective, and yet they are the most undeniable parts of being alive. And then there's the self. Are you a fixed thing, or a process, an illusion, a story told in real time by the brain to maintain continuity? The philosophy of mind doesn't claim to have all the answers, but it gives you the framework to ask the questions precisely, and to notice which ones bend under their own weight. So what is the philosophy of mind? It's the scaffolding beneath every question you've ever had about thinking, feeling, dreaming, being. Not a map of the mind, but a mirror held up to it. What is dreaming? Mind, you close your eyes, and suddenly, you're not just thinking. You're there, in a place that seems as real as any waking moment. In that moment, you step outside of time, inside yourself, and yet everything is somehow new. The philosophy of mind invites you to ponder. How can you be so deeply immersed in something that exists only within you? And in that question, you touch upon the very essence of consciousness, time, and reality. What is the dreaming mind? The world quiets, eyes close, and then, without warning, another world appears. You're flying, falling, or speaking to someone long gone. The sky might be green. Time might reverse. Nothing follows the rules, and yet it feels real. This is the dreaming mind, one of the most mysterious states the human brain can enter. Every night, without effort or instruction, your mind creates a theater of experience. Sometimes abstract, sometimes emotional, sometimes so vivid that waking up feels like leaving something behind. But what exactly is a dream? Biologically, most dreams occur during sleep, a phase where the brain becomes active while the body stays still. Your eyes twitch beneath closed lids. Your heart rate fluctuates. Neurons fire almost as intensely as they do during waking life, but your muscles are paralyzed. You're locked inside. Still, this doesn't explain the experience of dreaming, the narrative, the imagery, the emotion. Where do these stories come from? Some scientists say dreams are just neural noise, an incidental byproduct of the brain's nightly housekeeping, sorting, cleaning, and filing memories in a kind of mental defragmentation. Others argue that dreams serve a deeper role, simulating threats, solving problems, integrating emotions, creating a rehearsal space for life built from fragments of memory and feeling. And then there's another view, that dreams are a mirror, reflecting what the conscious mind avoids: repressed fears, unprocessed emotions, unfinished thoughts. Carl Jung believed dreams revealed the shadow self, the parts of us we hide during the day. But not all dreams are random or symbolic. In lucid dreams, the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming, sometimes even taking control, flying on purpose, visiting a place from memory, asking the dream itself questions. Consciousness folds inward, a mind aware within its own illusion, aware that it's an illusion. Strangely, dreams can feel more true than waking life. You remember them not as thoughts, but as experiences. Emotions are amplified. Logic is fluid. Identities bend. You might dream of being yourself, but different or not yourself at all, and yet it still feels like you were there. This raises a deeper question. What is the self in a dream? If your body is sleeping and your memories are scrambled, but you still feel like someone, who exactly is that someone? And if the mind can simulate a world so convincingly while asleep, how can we be sure the waking mind isn't doing something similar? The dreaming mind is not just the sleeping mind. It's the creative mind unleashed, the emotional mind unfiltered, the conscious mind unbound by rules. So what is the dreaming mind? It's a system that doesn't just process reality, it invents it. A painter with no brush, a traveler with no map, a self that flickers and reforms with each passing scene. And yet, night after night, it builds a world from silence and leaves you wondering each morning, which version of you was more real? Why did evolution give rise to dreaming before language, before logic? Why did evolution give rise to dreaming? Before waking thought took shape, the mind was already dreaming. Every species that dreams inherits a puzzle. Why invest in hallucinations during your most vulnerable hours? Why let the brain spin worlds that aren't even real? The answer may lie in the fact that dreaming came first. Some scientists believe that dreaming isn't a side effect of sleep. It is the foundation that consciousness was built on. The dreaming brain came online long before humans walked the earth. Reptiles, birds, and mammals all show signs of dreamlike activity. Dreaming, then, is not merely human. It is ancient, deeply conserved, selected somehow again and again across evolutionary time. One reason dreaming may exist is that it was the first form of mental simulation. Before animals could plan, they had to predict. Before they could think, they had to rehearse. Dreaming may have provided the original rehearsal engine, primitive, yet effective. Long before conscious strategy emerged, dreams may have given early brains the advantage of previewing possibilities. In this view, dreaming didn't evolve to be interpreted. It evolved to train the system without the risk of movement. A virtual landscape where instincts could be shaped not by remembered experience, but by internally generated practice. Evolution's first internal prototype lab. There's also the question of neural development. In mammals especially, infants spend massive portions of their sleep in dream-rich states. Human babies, for example, spend up to 50% of their sleep time in REM, yet they have no memories, no language, no structured learning. Why dream? One possibility is that dreams scaffold the brain, building the cognitive architecture before waking life fills it, like scaffolding around a structure still under construction. Dreaming may allow early neural systems to wire themselves up using internally generated signals, preparing the mind for a world it has not yet met. This scaffolding doesn't end in infancy. Even in adulthood, though less frequent, dreaming continues. Why? Possibly to reinforce cognitive flexibility. In a world that keeps changing, the brain needs a way to restructure itself without starting from scratch. Dreaming may provide these nightly micro-adjustments, not to replay the past, but to reshape how the mind relates to the future. Another idea looks beyond the individual toward evolutionary stability. Dreaming may have created a behavioral buffer, offloading certain mental processes into the night, like instinct rehearsal or emotional priming. This would allow daytime behavior to become more efficient, more responsive, more stable. Over generations, organisms that could adapt internally during sleep may have outperformed those that couldn't. So why did evolution give rise to dreaming? Because it gave early minds a place to run before they could walk, to model danger without entering it, to rehearse without risk, to wire themselves from within. Dreaming wasn't an accident of sleep, it was a leap into virtual space. And evolution chose to keep that leap alive. What is the role of language for the mind? Before language, there was sensation, the sound of water, the scent of danger, the pulse of hunger. Minds responded to the world shaped by reflex, shaped by pattern. But they couldn't describe what they felt. They couldn't name it. They couldn't carry it forward. Then came language, and the mind changed forever. At first glance, language seems like a tool for communication. We use it to express wants, ask questions, tell stories. But its role goes far deeper. Language doesn't just let us share thoughts, it shapes them. The moment you name something, you divide it from everything else. A feeling becomes anger. A memory becomes childhood. A thought becomes true or false. Language gives form to the formless. It turns waves of experience into structured units the mind can hold, compare, and revisit. Without language, thoughts exist, but they float. Language ties them down. It lets the mind build chains of logic, layers of metaphor, structures of meaning. It allows you to stack ideas, nest them, break them apart, and build them again. Language is not just how the mind speaks. It's how the mind organizes. It also reshapes time. With language, you don't just remember the past, you narrate it. You don't just imagine the future, you script it. You tell yourself stories about who you were, who you are, who you might become. And those stories become identity. Some scientists believe that inner speech, that voice in your head, is crucial for self-awareness. It's how the mind keeps track of itself. Without it, decisions become harder, self-control fades, planning weakens. In this view, language isn't just for talking to others. It's for talking to yourself. Language also opens the door to abstraction. You can think about justice, freedom, time, God, concepts that don't exist in the physical world. You can combine words that never met before, invisible cities, digital souls, broken clocks that still tell the truth. Each phrase builds a new mental space, a place that couldn't exist without names. But language also has limits. It simplifies. It compresses. It leaves things out. A word like love might mean something different to everyone who hears it. The more we name, the more we risk mistaking the label for the thing itself. Not everything the mind feels can be wrapped in syllables. Still, without language, the mind remains mostly private, fast, intuitive, but difficult to unpack. Language is what lets thoughts become shareable, repeatable, and recordable. It creates minds that not only think, but think together. So what is the role of language for the mind? It is memory extended, identity shaped, thought structured, and imagination set free. Language didn't just give the mind a voice. It gave it scaffolding. It turned raw experience into architecture. Maybe language even created that voice in your head, the one still speaking now, asking the oldest question. Who am I? Did language create the voice in your head? The narrator, the commentator, the voice that rehearses conversations, writes imaginary letters, narrates your choices as you make them, the one that sometimes just won't shut up. But where did it come from? Was it always there? It feels like the voice in your head is the most private, essential part of being you. Yet some researchers suggest it might be surprisingly recent, not a product of nature, but of language. Before we learn to speak, we still have minds. Babies react, feel, remember, explore, but they don't think in words. Their thoughts are visual, emotional, sensory. Language is something layered on top of those early experiences. And as words begin to take shape, so does the voice that uses them. Psychologist Lev Vygotsky believed that language begins outside the mind, between people. A child hears others speak. Then they start talking aloud to themselves. Gradually, that speech turns inward. It softens into silence. It becomes internal dialogue. The voice in the head is born from conversations that once needed sound. But it's more than just a whispering habit. Language gives the mind a new tool, narration. Once you can describe something, you can reflect on it. You can label your emotions, reframe your past, plan your future. The inner voice becomes a kind of manager, organizing, editing, explaining. It helps maintain a sense of continuity. It reminds you who you are. And yet, it also creates friction. That voice can loop, judge, rehearse worst-case scenarios. It can talk over experience. It can drown out silence. For many, it becomes not just a narrator, but a noise they can't control. Interestingly, not everyone experiences the inner voice in the same way. Some people report mostly images, shapes, impulses. Others say they hear multiple voices, each with its own tone, opinion, or agenda. The inner monologue is not as universal as we might assume. It's shaped by culture, development, and personality. And what about non-linguistic minds? Do animals have an inner voice? Probably not in the way we do. They think, react, solve problems. But without language, there's no running commentary, no constructed self in narrative form. There may be awareness, but no script. So did language create the voice in your head? Not entirely, but it gave it vocabulary, structure, a place to live. Language turned scattered thoughts into sentences. It turned the mind into a room where one part of you can speak and another part can listen. It's not the only way to think, but it's one of the loudest. And maybe that's why so many spiritual traditions emphasize quieting the inner voice, not to silence the mind, but to remember that before language, the mind still was. And beneath all the words, it still is. What is psychology? It's not just sessions, personality types, or diagnostic labels. It's not just emotions mapped on a chart or disorders listed in a manual. Those are only the surface. Psychology is something deeper, the study of the human mind, not through philosophy or poetry, but through observation, measurement, and patterns. It asks, what do people do? Why do they do it? And underneath it all, what is the mind really up to? But this wasn't always possible. For most of history, the mind was considered invisible, untouchable, immeasurable, beyond direct observation. It belonged to the realms of religion, introspection, and mystery. You couldn't weigh a thought. You couldn't bottle a dream. Then, in the late 19th century, something shifted. A new question emerged. What if we could study the mind like a natural system? What if thoughts, emotions, and behaviors followed laws we could uncover? Psychology was born not with answers, but with a decision to bring the mind into the domain of science. And from that decision, the field split. Some psychologists turned outward, focusing only on what could be seen and measured: behaviors, reflexes, learning curves, reaction times. If it wasn't observable, it didn't count. This approach became behaviorism, an attempt to make psychology as rigorous as physics. Others turned inward. They believed that to understand the mind, you had to explore the hidden world of attention, memory, desire, and pain. They studied dreams, introspection, emotional recall. It was messier, less precise, but it felt closer to the actual texture of experience. Today, psychology stands between those two poles. It doesn't just study how people act. It explores how they think, feel, and decide. It maps attention, models emotion, analyzes motivation. It searches for patterns behind irrational behavior, why we procrastinate, why we lash out, why we fall in love, and, deeper still, what drives the human animal? What keeps us moving? What derails us? What makes us repeat, avoid, sabotage, change? Psychology isn't about labeling minds. It's about uncovering the logic inside the chaos. It reminds us that thought isn't always rational, and that emotion isn't the opposite of logic, but often its foundation. It shows that memory can lie, that perception is biased, that two people can walk through the same room and live two completely different realities. In doing this, psychology offers more than insight. It offers empathy. It reveals that behind every action, no matter how strange, sudden, or self-defeating, there is a mind trying to make sense of its world. So what is psychology? It's not just the study of behavior. It's the science of what it feels like to be human, and why that feeling sometimes misfires. It's not a cure for the mind. It's a mirror held up to it, asking, quietly and continuously, not just what are you doing, but why are you doing it that way? What is behavior? When we think of behavior, we often think of action, movement, the things people do. Someone laughs, hesitates, lashes out, walks away, and we say, that's behavior. But behavior isn't just motion. It's meaningful motion. It's the mind turned outward, expressing itself not in words or feelings, but in decisions, in rhythms, in visible, measurable patterns. You don't always know what someone is thinking, but you can see what they do. That's why behavior became psychology's first language. It's observable, trackable, a living imprint of how the mind is adapting to the world. At its core, behavior is a response to conditions, not always conscious, not always rational, but always shaped by an internal logic. The brain doesn't wait for perfect information. It reads the moment, and the body moves. Scratch an itch. Blink. Check your phone. Fidget while waiting. These aren't mistakes. They're small-scale strategies, tiny calibrations between your internal state and your environment, the body adjusting itself without needing to ask permission. And some behaviors stretch far beyond the moment. Habits, routines, avoidance patterns, reactions that replay long after the original cause is gone. The mind learns from past outcomes and builds behavioral shortcuts. Sometimes those shortcuts work. Sometimes they don't. But the behavior stays, because it's familiar, because it once served a purpose. Behavior also encodes emotion. You might not always know how to name what you feel, but your posture knows. Your pace knows. The way you enter a room knows. Emotion lives in movement. It doesn't hide inside you. It leaks into gestures, tone, microexpressions. That's why you can feel tension in the room before a single word is spoken. Behavior isn't just reactive either. It's predictive. You prepare, you position, you posture yourself based on what might happen. That's why someone steps back just before being pushed, or why we glance toward exits before a conversation ends. Behavior constantly anticipates. Even stillness can be behavior. A held breath, a clenched jaw, silence in a moment that demands a reply. The absence of action isn't emptiness. It's a message, a choice, a signal sent without sound. And here's the twist. Not all behavior is your own. Much of what we do is coordinated, mirrored, shaped by social feedback. We pick up mannerisms, tones, postures, phrasing, not consciously, but automatically. We sync, we match, we blend, because fitting in was once a matter of survival. So what is behavior really? It's not just what you do. It's how your mind navigates the world through action. It's memory, mood, survival, prediction, adaptation, all woven into movement. It's thought in motion, feeling in form. It's the story your body tells before your mind has the words. Can the mind be simulated? Instinct and anticipation expressed as movement, not a symptom, not a mistake, but a language. One the body speaks fluently, even when the mind stays silent. Can the mind be simulated? It's one of the most haunting questions of our time. If the mind is just a system, parts, patterns, processes, then in theory, it should be copyable. A mind made of silicon instead of cells. A digital consciousness. A machine that doesn't just act like us, but feels like us. But is that really possible? To simulate a mind, we would need more than surface behavior. Not just a machine that can play chess or answer questions. We would need a system that can feel joy, imagine futures, dread loss, reflect on its own existence. We would need to recreate consciousness, the spark, not just the wiring. Some scientists believe it's only a matter of complexity. If we can model every neuron in the human brain, roughly 86 billion of them, and the trillions of connections between them, we might capture the essence of mind. This is the idea behind whole brain emulation. Scan the brain, map its structure, rebuild it in code. In this view, the brain isn't magical, it's mechanical. And if thought is what the brain does, then a simulated brain should think too. But there's a problem. A perfect simulation of water doesn't make anything wet. A perfect simulation of fire doesn't produce heat. So if we simulate a brain, does it feel? Or does it merely act as if it feels? That's the mystery at the heart of this question. Is mind about function or about feel? Functionalists argue, if it behaves like a mind, it is a mind. If it reacts, reflects, suffers pain when injured, feels joy when rewarded, then that's enough. Whether neurons or microchips, the software is the self. But others believe consciousness depends on biology, that there is something about the wet, organic, living nature of the brain that cannot be replicated in metal and code. You might recreate the behavior, but not the awareness. And even if we could simulate a mind, whose mind would it be? Would we copy an individual, memories and all, or build something entirely new? Would it start as a blank slate, or wake up with a self? Could it suffer? Could it grow? Could it want anything at all? And then there's the ethical question. If a simulated mind can suffer, are we responsible for its pain? Could we switch it off? Would that be murder? Or mercy? So, can the mind be simulated? Maybe. Technologically, we're getting closer. The models grow more sophisticated every year. The lines between biological and artificial thought are starting to blur. But philosophically, we may still be in the dark. Because even if we succeed, we might not know if the light inside that simulation is real. And until then, the mystery of the mind remains. Not just how to understand it, but how to recreate the thing that asks the question in the first place. What is average general intelligence? Is it a number, a score, something you can plot on a graph and circle in red ink? Not exactly. What we call general intelligence, or G, isn't a single skill. It's a pattern, a current running underneath problem solving, memory, reasoning, and adaptation. It's not what you know, it's how you learn. General intelligence is the ability to deal with complexity, to recognize patterns, to apply past knowledge to new situations, and to do all of that across a wide range of tasks. Math, language, spatial reasoning, even navigating social situations. The idea of G emerged from the work of Charles Spearman in the early 1900s. He noticed something curious. Students who performed well in one area, say vocabulary, tended to perform well in others, like math or memory. This suggested a shared cognitive engine, something deeper than any one skill, running beneath all mental tasks. That hidden engine is what we now call general intelligence. But what about average intelligence? Psychologists typically peg the average IQ score at 100. This isn't some cosmic truth, it's a statistical decision. On a bell curve, most people cluster around the middle. Average here doesn't mean typical experience or ultimate potential. It simply means placement relative to others on specific cognitive measures at a particular moment in time. And yet, intelligence is slippery. It doesn't unfold the same way in every mind. Some people solve puzzles without needing words. Some have brilliant memories but struggle to plan ahead. Some are dazzling with abstract ideas but miss emotional nuances. That's why average is such a tricky word. It doesn't mean normal. It doesn't mean limited. It just means somewhere in the middle of a rich, complicated distribution. And even G doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't measure creativity. It doesn't measure kindness, curiosity, or emotional insight. It doesn't capture the intelligence it takes to de-escalate a tense room, to notice what goes unsaid in a conversation, or to learn at lightning speed when real passion kicks in. Still, general intelligence matters. It predicts how well someone might navigate unfamiliar problems, how quickly they adapt when the rules change. It's a kind of mental flexibility, an ability to shift, to reframe, to find structure in the unknown. But there's something humbling about average intelligence, because even at the middle of the curve, the human mind remains extraordinary. It can imagine futures. It can build tools, compose music, reflect on its own reflection. It can wonder where it all comes from. It's not the number that's impressive. It's the fact that even so-called average minds contain language, memory, vision, fear, desire, and the capacity to ask questions the universe itself can't easily answer. So what is average general intelligence? It's not a ceiling. It's not a label. It's not a limit. It's just a midpoint, a place on a chart, inside a species capable of symphonies, spacecraft, poetry, and dreams. And maybe what matters far more than where your mind lands on a curve is what you choose to build with the space you've been given. What have the greatest minds said about the mind? For thousands of years, some of the most curious, brilliant, and restless minds have turned inward, not to find answers, but to better ask the question, what is this thing that thinks? Socrates famously said, "Know thyself," not as a slogan, but as a lifelong mission. He believed that the unexamined mind, the mind that never questions, never reflects, isn't truly alive. To him, understanding the mind was the beginning of understanding what it means to be human. Centuries later, Descartes took skepticism even further. He doubted everything, the senses, the body, even the stars above, until he reached one undeniable truth. I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, the very act of thinking was not just a product of existence. It was its foundation. David Hume offered a different view. When he looked inward, he found no solid self, no central I, only a shifting flow of sensations and perceptions. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, he wrote. To Hume, the self was not a thing, but a process, a flickering stream, always changing. Buddha went even deeper. He taught that what we call a self is merely a bundle of processes clung to out of fear. He described the mind not as a fixed object, but like a flame, dancing, flickering, never the same from one moment to the next. William James, the father of modern psychology, echoed this idea. He called consciousness a stream, continuous, changing, ungraspable. The mind, to James, wasn't something you could capture. It was a field to be explored, ever shifting underfoot. Carl Jung believed the mind went even deeper still, that beneath our individual thoughts and feelings lies a collective unconscious, a vast shared reservoir of memories and archetypes passed down through generations. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes, he wrote. Alan Turing, one of the architects of modern computing, asked a bold question. Could a machine think? In asking, he forced us to wonder what thinking truly is, and where the line between human and artificial minds might lie, a question we still wrestle with today. Patricia Chutchland, a contemporary philosopher, brings us back to the biological roots. The mind is what the brain does, she writes, reminding us that thought and consciousness arise not from some ghostly force, but from the astonishing workings of matter itself. And yet, even in this clarity, mystery remains. Each of these minds saw differently, disagreed, even contradicted each other. But they all touched something invisible, something you cannot point to, but which you live inside every day. So what have the greatest minds said about the mind? That it is a stream, a flame, a mirror, a mystery. That it is not just something you have, but something you are, and something you are always, quietly, becoming. And perhaps the deepest, most unsettling thought, that the universe itself may only exist because there is a mind to behold it. Without mind, would there be stars? Would there be time? Would there be anything at all? Does the universe only exist because of mind? Out there, in the vast silence, galaxies spin, stars collapse, and time flows relentlessly forward. The cosmos churns, indifferent and immense. But at some point, in one small corner of it, awareness stirred. A mind opened, and in that opening, a question arose. What is all of this? And more unsettling still, would any of it exist without a mind to ask? Physics does not shy away from this question. In fact, it quietly invites it. The anthropic principle suggests that the universe appears the way it does precisely because we are here to observe it. Not that it was made for us, but that only a universe with just the right conditions could ever contain beings capable of asking why it exists at all. Out of the near-infinite tapestry of possible physical laws, we find ourselves in one where minds can emerge, coincidence or necessity. Then there's quantum theory, where the world at its smallest scales behaves strangely. Particles seem suspended between possibilities until observed, as if reality itself hesitates, holding its breath, waiting to be noticed. Some physicists insist this is mere mathematics. Others wonder if it hints at something deeper. That observation isn't just a feature of the universe, but a foundation of it. Philosophers like George Berkeley pushed this idea centuries ago, arguing that existence depends on perception. To be is to be perceived. Without a mind to witness it, a tree falling in the forest doesn't just fall silently. It may not, in any meaningful sense, be there at all. More recently, physicists like John Wheeler proposed a bold vision, a participatory universe. Reality, he suggested, isn't a static backdrop, but an unfolding story, written only as it is read. In Wheeler's words, the universe does not exist out there independent of us. Of course, this doesn't mean the stars vanish when we close our eyes, or that the moon ceases when we sleep. But it suggests that mind and cosmos are not separate things. They are entangled, two sides of one mysterious coin. The universe, then, might be more than fields, atoms, and dark matter. It might also be the experience of those things, the witness, the moment, the awareness that says, here it is. Without mind, the cosmos might still spin its endless dance. But there would be no one to see it, no one to wonder, no one to know that it had ever spun at all. In that sense, the universe may not need minds to exist, but it might need them to matter. And what about the mind itself? We've mapped its anatomy, traced its electrical storms, dissected its chemical whispers, yet its essence remains elusive. What is it that peers out from behind our eyes, that questions, that dreams, that asks if anything exists at all? Perhaps, in the end, mind and universe are reflections in each other's eyes, each giving the other meaning, each impossible without the other. And perhaps, just perhaps, to ask, does the universe exist without mind, is to glimpse that there was never a true separation to begin with. Will we ever understand the mind completely? We have named its lobes, tracked its pulses, watched neurons light up like distant constellations. We've built theories, models, machines. We've broken it into parts, emotion, memory, attention, self. And yet, it slips away. The closer we look, the more the mind blurs under the microscope. Like a dream you can't quite remember. Like a voice fading just as you begin to listen. Why? Maybe because the mind is not just the object of study, but the tool doing the studying. A mirror trying to reflect itself. A flame trying to see its own fire. Every insight is filtered through the very thing it's trying to reveal. Some scientists believe we're close. That once we model enough neurons, once we decode the full complexity of the brain, the mystery will collapse into understanding. Others disagree. They argue there's something irreducible about experience. Subjective, first-person raw, that no scan or simulation can ever fully capture. Philosopher Thomas Nagel once asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" Not in terms of behavior or biology, but in the bat's experience. Its sonar, its spatial sense, its living pulse of the world. That question still echoes. Because even if we explain how the mind works, do we ever fully know what it feels like to be someone or something else? There's also the question of limits. Not of knowledge, but of cognition itself. Maybe the mind wasn't shaped to understand itself, only to survive, to navigate, to imagine just enough. A flashlight can light up the world, but it can't light up the bulb inside itself. It was never meant to. But maybe that's not a failure. Maybe the mind isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a song to be listened to. Understood not in full, but in rhythm, in mood, in motion. Because the very act of wondering, of searching, of reflecting, is already part of what it means to have a mind. To chase questions that may never settle. To explore a landscape of thought, even as the map keeps shifting. Will we ever understand the mind completely? Maybe not. But maybe we don't need to. Maybe the beauty of the mind isn't in its clarity, but in its depth, in its ability to ask, to feel, to imagine, to dream. And maybe the deepest understanding of the mind is simply the quiet awe of realizing you are inside one. What will future minds be like? The mind you're using to hear these words is the product of deep time. Millions of years have shaped its circuits. Stone tools, firelight, language, memory. Evolution didn't design it to understand particle physics, or to code, or to gaze at galaxies. It designed it to survive, to bond, to wonder. But now, something is shifting. For the first time in history, a mind has begun to redesign itself. With machines, with chemicals, with wires and code, and with questions no other species has ever dared to ask. So what comes next? Some say the future mind will be faster. Memory that never fades. Thought speed no longer tethered to flesh. Access to entire libraries of knowledge, not learned by study, but streamed directly, like a kind of synthetic intuition. Knowledge as fluid as breath. Others imagine the mind becoming less individual, more collective. Networked consciousness, where neural interfaces link thought to thought. What one person feels, another could feel instantly. Empathy not as a virtue, but as architecture. Or maybe the future mind won't be human at all. Maybe it will live in silicon, trained by data. Awake, but not like us. Minds that do not tire, do not sleep, do not dream, unless we teach them how. Minds without fear, or joy, or identity in the way we know them, yet still somehow thinking. And what happens to us then? Some believe we'll merge, augment ourselves, weave biology with machine, stretching the self without losing it. Others believe we'll split, that artificial minds will evolve their own destinies, and we will watch from the shore, unsure whether we have created a mirror or something stranger. Yet not all future minds will be technological. Some will turn inward, meditative, minimalist, intentional. Minds that train not to accelerate, but to slow, to sharpen, to see clearly through the noise. In the end, the future mind may not be a singular thing at all. It may be a vast unfolding of many kinds of minds, moving in many directions, each asking, each becoming, each dreaming a different future into being. What does the mind reveal about ultimate reality? Perhaps to suffer less. The future mind may not simply be augmented, it may be awakened. And perhaps it will not be a matter of either or. Maybe the future will hold multitudes. Digital minds orbiting in silent constellations. Quiet minds rooted in ancient forests. Some minds reaching out to the farthest edges of intelligence. Others returning to something simpler, older, and more still. Because a mind is not just a tool. It is not just memory, or speed, or language. It is a way of relating to reality itself. And though the future shape of mind may be faster and stranger than we can yet imagine, it will still be asking the same quiet questions. What am I? Where am I going? What else could I become? What will future minds be like? Faster, yes. Stranger, almost certainly. But also, still searching. And maybe that search is what will never change. What does the mind reveal about ultimate reality? Across history, we have used the mind as our primary tool to understand the world around us. We invented language, science, mathematics, and philosophy. We built systems to measure, predict, and model reality. But every system we create is shaped and limited by the very structure of the mind itself. The mind interprets. It simplifies vast, overwhelming complexity into patterns we can use. It compresses information, highlights what matters for survival, and filters out what does not. It does not record reality directly. It builds a manageable version of it. From this, a profound truth emerges. The mind does not experience reality as it truly is. It experiences reality only as it can be processed. Sensory limitations, cognitive biases, emotional weightings, all influence what we perceive and how we understand it. The mind is not a transparent window onto the universe. It is an active participant, a creator of experience. What we call the world has already been heavily reconstructed before we are even aware of it. This does not mean ultimate reality does not exist. It likely does. But the version of reality we interact with, the one we live and breathe, is shaped at every level by the mind's operating constraints. Color, sound, time, selfhood. All of these arise from the way biological systems interpret external inputs. Even in physics, models like quantum theory suggest that observation, the act of noticing, does not merely record phenomena but participates in their formation. At the smallest scales, reality seems intertwined with measurement itself. Yet participation is not the same as creation. Ultimate reality is not an invention of mind. It is the underlying structure that the mind imperfectly attempts to model. Thus, the mind reveals several key things about ultimate reality. First, reality is not directly accessible without distortion. Second, any model we build is provisional, shaped by cognitive architecture. Third, even though complete understanding may be impossible, partial, functional understanding is attainable and has been enough to allow us to survive, evolve, and build civilizations. In the end, the mind does not reveal what ultimate reality is in itself. It reveals what reality appears to be when filtered through an evolved, constrained cognitive system. Recognizing this limitation is not a defeat. It is the beginning. It is the starting point of a more careful use of the mind, aware of both its immense power and its inherent boundaries. Ultimate reality likely exists independent of our thoughts about it, but every thought we have about it passes through the luminous, distorted mirror of mind. Understanding that mirror, studying it, questioning it, may be as close as we will ever come to glimpsing what lies beyond. And maybe, that too, will never change.